No pain, no gain is dead. No pain, no gain is harmful. And if we focus on no pain, no gain, we may end up being fit but unhealthy. Everyone is an athlete. We all have the genetic blueprint to be athletic, physically active, and healthy as well. Fat burning is the world's best kept secret. By burning the fat we have stored in our body, we can get healthier, we can improve our fitness, and we can reduce our body fat and get leaner. Even the leanest among us has enough fat to walk 600 miles. And it's really very simple to do. We just have to turn on our fat burning mechanism, and we all have that ability. In the beginning of the MAF program, many people are burning very small amounts of fat, and as they change their diet and as they improve their exercise habits, they start burning more and more fat with less reliance on blood sugar. They may end up burning 80% fat and 20% sugar. And as that happens, they get to be a better athlete, a healthier person. They have more energy. A lot of their signs and symptoms disappear because their body's working better, their brain is working better. It's very important to individualize all of this, and that's what the MAF method is all about, helping you personalize the nutrition part. In other words, what foods are best for your body, personalize the exercise part, and looking at and managing physical stress, chemical stress, and mental emotional stress. No pain.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the session here this morning. And before I introduce Dr. Phil Maffetone and thank him for making his really valuable time available to us, I'd just like to introduce myself and Katie Gray. So there's Phil, Katie, and myself. So Katie is the founder of Holistic Endurance. She's a performance coach and sports nutritionist, and she's got a passion for optimizing athletic and human potential using sophisticated approaches which integrate elements of wellness and performance for the everyday athlete. Like myself, she's a founding member of the Maffetone coaching program, the foundation program. The qualifications, she's a postgraduate in human nutrition from Deakin University. She's got a Bachelor of Exercise Science with a major in sports psychology. She's a life coach, Cert 4 health and business major. She has functional movement assessment and strength coach qualifications level 1 and 2. She's training peak certified, and she's a metabolic precision nutrition coach level 1 and 2. Myself, I'm Andre Bradovic. Some of you may know me already. If not, nice to meet you. I'm a primal health coach certified out of the Primal Health Institute from Mark Sisson in the USA. I'm an ICF certified PCC level leadership and personal coach, USA level 1 triathlon coach, obviously Australian or Tri-Australia development coach, Cert 3 for fitness and allied health certified. I'm about to become a member of the honorary member of the Science Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners. I'm an ambassador for the Noakes Foundation, a Stride power-based level 1 coach, and I compete in half Ironmans as my race distance and marathons. And as I said before, I'm also a founding member of the MAF coaching program. So on to much more important things. Let's talk a bit about Phil, and then he'll get front and center on the stage. So Phil's an enigma in the health and endurance community. He's a practitioner which has run his own practice for more than 20 years. He's coached some of the world's best endurance athletes, including the legendary Mark Allen, and as you know, he is one of the world's greatest Ironman champions. Phil's also consulted with many organisations, including the US Air Force, helping pilots cope with 40-hour world record flights during the Cold War, where he revolutionised their approach to managing sleep, stress, and nutrition with amazing results. He developed a method for heart rate training known as the maximum aerobic function, or the MAF method, which actually has nothing to do with his surname, which most people would think it would. He's published over 20 books, this being one of his greatest. I love this book. And he was named the Triathlon magazine Coach of the Year in 1995. And in 2000 was named one of the top 20 most influential people in endurance sports worldwide. One of his greatest sayings is no pain, no gain is dead. And I totally agree with that. Let me explain just briefly why, and then let's get Phil to open up. So I use the MAF method, and I've used it myself for 7 years, and it's the only method I use to coach my athletes. I really ask you to listen deeply to Phil's talk, because some of the things he could significantly change the performance of some of your athletes. Now, here are some numbers to consider. A 3:45 marathon in 2011, average pace 5:17, average heart rate 141, maximum 156. We go to 2020, marathon time 3:27, pace 4:55, maximum heart rate 152, average 126. 10K run in June 2020, 40 minutes 24 seconds, pace 4:02, average heart rate 133, maximum heart rate 155. And lastly, a 10K run in July 2011, time 65 minutes 34, average pace 6:11, average heart rate 129, maximum heart rate 146. So those results show that we can get faster and have higher performance as we get older with a much lower heart rate. They're my numbers, or some of my numbers. And that's what I've achieved by using the MAF method, thanks to Phil. So I really hope you learned something from the principles of the talk that Phil goes through. I'm sure I and everyone in the call will get a lot out of it. I'm so glad we've been able to get him to make his valuable time to share his wisdom. Thank you all for your attendance, and I'll hand over to Phil. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Andre. Great introduction. I appreciate that. Hi, Katie. Good to see you again. And there's so much to talk about. For example, I've got 400 articles on my website that are all different with different topics. They're all under the same or similar umbrellas of nutrition or training or other topics, but they're specific discussions about a particular issue relating to that topic. And so there's just a lot. And I always say to people, MAF is not difficult. There's just a lot of things to consider. And that's essentially what the human body is all about. We are an amazing system made up of other systems and subsystems, and they're all related. Everything is related, and we live in a world, especially with our education, where we segment things. Let's talk about the nervous system. Let's talk about the muscles. Let's talk about the gut. Boy, that's really hard to do. That's almost impossible to do, because you can't talk about the gut unless you talk about the brain, for example. You can't talk about muscle contraction and relaxation without talking about the nervous system, and so forth, and nutrition and everything else. So I'm gonna just give you an overview of MAF, maximum aerobic function, and why it's called that. And then we'll have some questions and answers, maybe along the way, but certainly by the end. And we'll try and answer everything we can. Early in I went into practice in 1977. U.S. was getting worse and worse, and I couldn't deal with it, and I became a consultant. Instead of athletes coming to see me, I would go to see them, um, and it was fun going to other places, and so that was fun, and I did that for 20 years as well. But um, one of the important aspects of what I have always done is the fact that I have a clinical background, and the idea of training, the idea of doing anything at the expense of your health is not acceptable. And um, and so we train because we want to get faster. We train because we've got an important Ironman coming up. We train because we want to stay fit, whatever. But there's something called health, and we have to always be aware that health and fitness together have to be balanced, because if we lag behind in our health, we try to get our fitness to a higher level, we crash. And of course, if we're really, really healthy, but we're not paying attention to our fitness and it's not progressing properly for whatever reason, we don't perform as well from an athletic standpoint. We don't reach our human potential. And one thing about humans is that we naturally get faster. We naturally get better because we're all athletes. And so if you're not getting better, whatever program you're doing, if you're not getting better, something is wrong with you, not the program. And your job is to figure out what that is. And I'm happy to help you do that. That's what I've been writing about and lecturing about, and my podcasts are all focused on that. Here are some clues about the issue of, well, I've been doing this for 2 months, my math test is no better. Okay, here are the things that are common in that situation. I've been eating well, I think, but my body fat is still high. Okay, well, here are the common issues, and here are some case studies of interesting people that have gone through that and what they have discovered. So my whole approach is a natural one. Humans are naturally athletic. When I say everyone is an athlete, I mean that everyone is an athlete. Some people are not in very good shape. They're still athletes. They're just out of shape or broken down athletes. But we are all humans, and as a result, we're all athletes. And take away the roadblocks, and we will make progress automatically, because that's what humans do. It's really that simple. And what I started doing in order to always focus on that balance of health and fitness is put together a lot of different kinds of tools, a lot of different kinds of philosophies. The philosophy of maximum aerobic function, for example, is a human, it's a very important human component. The earliest humans had maximum aerobic function because that's what our genes show, and that's what humans have been doing with their environment to express those genes. And we should have high levels of aerobic function, and I'll come back to that aerobic definition later. We can say it's about fat burning. We can say it's about long-term energy systems. Aerobic humans are highly aerobic. We have this unique ability to sprint as well, but we are really strong aerobic creatures. And I started putting a lot of, because I didn't want to have athletes come to see me in my clinic and me say, okay, here's here's what you should do. I never really gave anybody a schedule. I never gave anybody a diet. I helped them understand what the human body was all about and how to make it perform better. And so I came up with a lot of tools that were available. We could pick and choose the tools based on various things, signs and symptoms. If we're feeling this way, or if this is not happening, or that's happening, there's a tool to help us get through that. There's a tool to help us measure it, possibly. For example, body fat. The fact is, most people are not going to go and have a DEXA scan every month or two because it's not safe, it's expensive, it's just not practical. So here's a better way to measure fat at home accurately, as accurate as a DEXA scan, essentially. And so that's an important tool. That's called the waist to height ratio. And the waist, excuse me, the waist should be less than half the height. And if it's not, you may have excess body fat. You may be over fat. And I've written a number of papers on the overfat pandemic, which is a serious problem in the world. That's in part why we have this COVID problem. But overfat is a serious problem in the athletic population as well. And it's interesting that in the last 20 years, most amateur times have really gotten worse. And a lot of professional times have gotten worse as well. We have the lead pack amateurs, like Dan Plews, who's breaking records. We have the lead pack marathoners. Of course, the Africans are often out there breaking records still, but they are the exception. They're almost the entertainment of the sport because they're doing things that too many people are not doing, which is running their best, reaching their athletic potential, and breaking records. And amateurs need to do that, and we haven't, that trend in diminishing times in the 10K, in the half marathon, in the marathon, that's been going on for 20 plus years now, which is really sad. And I started seeing that way back in the late 90s with the histories of the athletes. They would come into my clinic, and then eventually the athletes I would go and see, tell me send me a list of your races in the last 5 years. Tell me what your times are. When was your last personal best? And it's really gotten sad. No surprise, because I did a study a couple of years ago showing that 91% of American adults were overfat. Now that's a lot of people, and a lot of them are not competitive athletes, but many of them are. And if you're overfat, you're not going to run a personal best. First of all, it means you're not burning enough fat for long-term energy, and if you're not burning enough fat, your race energy is low. You're impaired from an energy production standpoint. You're relying on glucose, on glycogen, and of course, most people know by now that isn't going to get you very far because fat is the fuel that endurance athletes use. So all these tools like the waist to height ratio became more and more valuable. The MAF test, where people could objectively measure how they're improving over time, how from month to month, how much faster am I getting at the same heart rate, the same sub-max heart rate with my training. And if you're not getting faster, there's a problem. So lots of tools, we'll hit on some of them. The 2-week test, which is a way you can help uh, uh, get a good sense of your level of insulin resistance, or as I have always called it, carbohydrate intolerance. I like to use carbohydrate intolerance because it's people can relate to that. They know what carbohydrates are. They know what intolerance is. When you say insulin resistance, if they're not diabetic, they're now confused, and you've kind of lost you've kind of lost them, which is unfortunate. So I've always used carbohydrate intolerance. It's an old term for insulin resistance. It's been around for long before I became a student. Um, and what's happened in the world, as you would expect, is that people are becoming more and more carbohydrate intolerant. And they're becoming more carbohydrate intolerant because they're eating more refined carbohydrates. Essentially, almost all the carbohydrates that people eat are refined carbohydrates. And they turn to sugar very quickly. So it's just, having a plain bagel, because you don't want to put cream cheese on it because it's there's too many calories. That bagel, half that bagel turns to sugar immediately and is stored as fat. And you end up storing more fat than if you were to put cream cheese on your bagel, for various reasons. So,
you would want to use that cheap.
The 2-week test is a very important thing because what's happening, Katie, is people have lost their sense, their instincts, their intuition, and what the 2-week test does is it helps them feel what it feels like to eat too many carbohydrates or get off sugar, which is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that 2-week test is through your app, right?
You can do it through the app. There's an article called Carbohydrate Intolerance and the 2-week Test. You can read that. I really like it when people say, I'm gonna read this article. I'm gonna think about this 2-week test thing. I know about carbohydrates. I know about fats. I know, but I need to understand the big picture. I need to get the concept. And once you get the concept, you don't need an app and you don't need an article. They give you clues about what you could eat, what you should do, what you should not do. But basically, you take away all the junk food, and you take away all the high glycemic foods like dried fruit and pineapple and grapes and things that have been genetically changed so that they're very, very sweet, and it's really basically like sugar. You take away those things, and here's the trick, and I don't know why people forget this part. You take away all this stuff, and then you add the healthy stuff. You add the vegetables, the healthy vegetables. You add, avocados. You add some meat, fish, cheese, coconut oil, olive oil, butter. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and said, look, the 2-week test is very simple. You don't eat any refined bread, which is most of it. No cookies, no cakes, no candy. No ice cream, no sweetened yogurt, no waffles, no cereal, no milk. And at some point they stop me and say, that's all I eat. And of course, that's why they're the way they are.
Yeah.
But people take that away, and sometimes that's the easy part, but then they forget to add the important nutrients back in, and they now go into a caloric deficit, and that's as serious a problem as they had before. So all these tools are very important to really to help people. But the foundation of MAF is education. I want people to understand what it feels like to get off sugar. I want them to see that when they get off sugar and they're eating more fat, they actually start losing body fat. And wow, that's strange. How does that happen? Well, that's called nature. The problem is we have been fed so many lies by the companies that sell junk food and our governments, who in the U.S., for example, the government subsidizes junk food. Come on, what's that all about? It's like subsidizing cigarettes. Well, they didn't subsidize cigarettes way back when, but they turned their back and they looked the other way because tobacco companies were very, very big players in politics. Um, so education, understanding that health and fitness are two very, very important things. one of the scientific papers I wrote with my friend and colleague Paul Larson is called. I have trouble with titles.
Is this the Fit Not Healthy one? I was going to ask you about that because I think.
No, it's the one on the brain.
Like central governor. Is it
referring no? Well, it indirectly talks about central governor. The central governor is just the brain. So the question is, how does a whole population with propaganda drop common sense and blindly follow these stupid recommendations?
Because it makes sense, Phil. Like we all know it makes sense. It makes sense. Eat fat, you get fat. Or like 8 years ago, I was 80 kilos, right? Like whatever that is in pounds. I'm 62 now, and I've been that for 7 years. But then I wasn't. I was following conventional stupidity. It was like I was going to a dietitian. I was paying $200 an hour for her to keep me fat, and it was because I believed that I had to do this calorie deficiency thing, train like hell, eat like a sparrow, and I lost 2 or 3 kilos. And I was always exhausted. My calves were always inflamed. And I was doing a 3:49 marathon. Now I'm doing a 3:26, and I do that fasted. And I'm never sore, and I'm never hungry, and I don't have to go to a dietitian because I stopped eating the processed food and carbs.
Because you're burning a lot of fat.
Exactly.
It's really simple. We've got an engine. We've got this aerobic engine. And if we keep feeding it energy, ATP, which comes from fat and glucose. If we keep feeding that engine, it keeps going faster. What a deal. And it's really sad what has happened to the whole population. And all you have to do is go out in the street and look at people walking by, and you'll see what it's done. And this overfat pandemic is getting worse and worse. It really hasn't slowed down.
What I think I understand this, but just explain, what does overfat mean? How would you explain that in terms of that, or overweight? How would you explain that?
Particularly for athletes, because I think sometimes athletes go, well, that's not possible.
Not possible.
Athlete, and they put the blinders onto that concept. There's actually the common endurance athletes.
Yeah. So the human body needs a certain amount of body fat to function. Body fat is a highly metabolic tissue, very important. It's important for the immune system. It's important as an energy store. It's important for our metabolism. And the reason, Andre, you could run a marathon fasting is because you're able to access your stored body fat. And the leanest among us has enough stored fat to run hundreds and hundreds of miles. But you're right. We have these cliches. We have these things like calories in, calories out. Eat. If you eat fat, you're going to get fat. If you want to, you have to train fast to race fast. The fact is, you can train slow and race your fastest ever. You can eat a lot of fat and lose body fat. And so, to answer your question, Andre, overfat means we have more than our normal need of body fat. We can have too little body fat. We see that in overtrained athletes, for example. But the problem is usually that people have too much body fat. They've gone over that normal range, and I have a chart on the website that has percent body fat for under fat, normal fat, and over fat. The trick for people, everybody wants to know their numbers. What is my body fat? I want to know my body fat. Most people never get their body fat taken accurately. It's like VO2 max. Everybody talks about it, but nobody really gets it measured. Almost nobody gets it measured. And even then,
it's a dumb model.
Is it accurate? And also, yeah, like who cares? It's the submax performance, not VO2 max, that is a better predictor of endurance performance. And that's what the MAF test is all about. So overfat means you have too much stored fat. And when body fat rises above that normal threshold, it no longer functions normally from a metabolic standpoint. The immune system crashes, which is why pandemics like COVID parallel the overfat pandemic. Our metabolism slows down, so we store more fat than we normally would because our metabolism is slow. And of course, our body gets bigger, which may or may not have anything to do with body weight or obesity. In fact, if you want to look at the overfat population, what you have is people who are overweight, you have people who are obese, and then you have people who are normal weight and non-obese, but also overfat. And these are people typically who have the big pot bellies. Their weight is in the normal range. They're not obese, but they're overfat. I did a study in India. 80%, I think it was 80.5% of Indian adults are overfat. That was astounding. That was a shock to me. I mean, I'm not shocked pretty easily. How in the world could 80% of Indian adults be overfat? Well, they're storing it as belly fat, and they're relatively lean, skinny people, most of them, and so they're normal weight, and they're not obese, but so many are overfat because they have excess body fat.
Yeah. Phil, for the listeners and viewers, can you just give a quick overview of the MAF test and the different heart rate things we need to think about? And I'm sure that people will. I think the guys will make sure some links to the site are on the stream when it comes out later on as well. But maybe just because we've talked a lot about it and some people may not actually understand what it is, that might be helpful.
Sure, and the key feature of developing maximum aerobic function, developing a body that can burn a lot of fat for energy when we need it, when we want it, when we dictate, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a marathon. I want to burn a lot of fat. The key is to train at a certain heart rate that allows that to happen. Now that's the training part. There's a dietary part, which is getting rid of the junk food, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. That aerobic training is a relatively low sub-max level of intensity, a relatively low heart rate. It's called the maximum aerobic function heart rate, which is the same as the aerobic threshold. Everybody knows what the anaerobic threshold is, right? No, they don't, but they think they do, but they've heard of it. This is the aerobic threshold. This is the level as your intensity goes up. At some point, you're at that really great, easy pace of running and cycling may not be so easy because you get faster and faster and it gets a little harder, even though your heart rate is relatively low. But that maximum aerobic function heart rate is something you can determine in a laboratory. But again, most people are not going to go to a laboratory. So I developed something called the 180 formula, where you can plug in a variety of numbers. And we won't go through all that right now, but it's on the website because there's a lot of little pieces to it. You basically subtract your age from 180, which doesn't mean anything. It's not like 220 minus your age is some hypothetical max heart rate, which doesn't apply that often. But 180 minus the age is just a means to get to this MAF, fat burning heart rate. And you subtract your age from 180, and then you find one of four categories to fit into based on your various health factors, based on various fitness factors. If you're overtrained, if you're overfat, if you're injured, if you haven't been progressing, you either subtract another 10. If you're on medication, you subtract another 10. You subtract 5, you keep 180 minus the age the same, or you add 5 based on all those different factors. And then that's the heart rate you can train at to develop your aerobic system to burn more fat. That's also the heart rate you could use to perform the MAF test. So the question is, if you're running, for example, how fast can I run at my MAF heart rate? If I could run this fast today, in a month, I should be running faster. In 2 months, faster. In 6 months, noticeably faster. In a year, significantly faster. On the bike, same thing happens. We're in a different situation, obviously, on the bike. When we're running, we're enlisting all our muscle groups. We've got max gravity stress affecting us and so forth. On the bike, we don't. We can spin more, and so we have a perceived exertion that's a lot higher, which doesn't mean anything other than we're gonna be able to generate more power after the first month of doing this. After 2 months, more power, then even more power after 3, 5, 6 months. And after a year, we're going to be complaining that we have to ride too fast to keep up with that relatively low MAF heart rate. And what happens in runners is they'll get their MAF heart rate, they'll go out on the track or do a GPS test on a flat road, and they'll come back, and most of them will say, this is slow. How is this going to help?
Yeah.
It does help, and it's not that many months later that those same people start complaining that they have to run too fast at the same heart rate.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mark Allen in the beginning. Mark, has a notorious story about him starting at a 8:30 pace, even slower on the road, but 8:30 pace on the track, and he progressed to a 5:20 pace at the same heart rate over time. And that's just how it works. That's how the human body works. You just, like I said, get rid of those roadblocks, get rid of everything that's in the way, and performance improves.
Yeah, Phil, I've got a question from one of the viewers. I won't mention her name, but one of the viewers says, my coach had me on this method coach had her on this message for a year. She struggled to get anywhere near the required heart rates. I would assume that means she near the required heart rate. So whether that means, I would assume it means she found it too hard to run so slow and she struggled on it, what could have been going wrong? So I'm assuming, like most people that I coach, initially, like you say, they find it too very difficult to run so slow because that doesn't make sense to them, but over time it does. So I'm assuming that's the same problem. What would you suggest could have been going wrong from your perspective with that basic information?
Well, the two most common reasons people don't progress right away, and I say give it a month or two, and if you're not showing progress, you got to rethink all of the things you did to number one, choose a certain heart rate. Did you use the formula properly? Were you honest in your appraisal of that 180 formula? I can't tell you all the silly things I've heard from people, like, a 50-year-old guy says, I ran track in high school, and so I added 10 beats. Okay, it doesn't work that way. You've got to be honest. And if you've made an honest appraisal, and you've got the right heart rate, okay, that's one of the common problems. Or if you're on medication, any medication, not just medications that change the heart rate, but any medication, you subtract 10. And so if you make an honest appraisal with that 180 formula, the other most common of the two problems that interfere with people making progress is food. They're typically eating too many carbohydrates for their level of carbohydrate intolerance, their level of insulin resistance. And by the way, insulin resistance gets worse as we age. So as we age, we should be eating less and less carbohydrates because we become more insulin resistant. But that food part is really important, because if you're eating more carbohydrate than your body can tolerate, you're not going to burn as much fat.
I'd love to speak to this as well, because I've seen this a lot coaching athletes with the math method now for 8-ish years. Agree with what Phil has just said in the honest appraisal of the numbers, but also the element of stressing less and the cortisol picture. So I often find that people's heart rate is running too high because they're also running at a really high stress level all the time, and that in some people is a unconscious stress. They might not even report that they are a stressed person because they're just used to running on adrenaline and rushing from thing to thing, and it's not until they calm down and bring simplicity into their life that they can reflect and be like, whoa, I was running around like a headless chook. No wonder my body was showing signs of stress, and that's where the elevated heart rate can come in. I've had so many athletes go do a MAF test and say not be able to run, and they just have to walk it, and they're demoralized, and it's horrible. And then I'll get them to do it a couple of days later. I'll get them to do some belly breathing, some meditation, legs up the wall, go redo the test, and they can suddenly run. Now, they didn't get fitter in 3 days. They got calmer. So there's that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've seen that with people who have done the 2-week test. Sometimes they just quickly, their metabolism snaps out of it. I have something called the 5-minute power break, which is the combination of belly breathing, eyes closed, lying down, and listening to music. All the things that increase alpha waves, which lower stress hormones. But stress is a huge problem. And if you're a triathlete and you have to run and bike and swim, and you have a family and you have a job and you have some social activities, you squeeze that into your week? And that's what people do. They squeeze it in, and so they sleep a little less because they got to get up at 4 o'clock to get to the pool, and they gotta it's insane. But what I wanted to mention about stress is that people also don't understand what stress is. They think it's a mental, emotional thing, which it is. But stress can be physical. Having a dental problem is a common physical stress, significant stress. Sitting all day, very, very common physical stress. Wearing bad shoes on your bike or on the run or to work. Bad shoes are huge stress. There's so many little nerve endings down in the feet, and you beat those feet up, and man, your body is stressed. And then we have the biochemical stress, which is diet in part, air pollution, medication, but food, and too much coffee, trying to keep up because your energy is low, and so the thing about stress is that it accumulates. All these stresses, they could all be minor stresses, but they all accumulate.
And then we go and exercise like crazy at 5 a.m.
Yeah, that's what we're taught.
Stress.
Yeah, we're taught to no pain, no gain. We gotta get rid of the stress. We're gonna play racquetball and smash the ball, or we're gonna run really hard and sprint the last 200 meters because that's what my high school gym coach told me to do.
Yeah. Phil, another question, sorry to interrupt, but we've got about 10 minutes left. Would you be able to talk a bit more, and I know it's a big topic, about practical elements of incorporating math into training?
Well, the first very important thing is to establish where you're at. Where are you at? Are you just getting through a period of training where you've been worn out, you're injured, maybe you're realizing you're overtrained, or are you getting through a period where you have trained at a nice, effective sub-max heart rate, and you're feeling good and you've gotten faster? So depending on where you're at, if you are injured, if you're over fat, if whatever you're doing, if things are not working right, obviously it's time for a change. And if that's the case, you want to take 4, 5, 6 months to train at that easy aerobic heart rate. That's called an aerobic base. And allow your aerobic system to build up. And it's not just fat burning, which is very, very important, but the aerobic system, one of the things that happens is we develop all of our aerobic muscle fibers, those slow twitch, red aerobic muscle fibers. And they're important because they support our joints all day long. They support our ligaments. All of our soft tissue is supported by those slow twitch aerobic muscles, because these aerobic muscles can work all day long without fatiguing. So if we have an injury, if we have one nagging injury after another, or something that's just chronic and nobody could fix it, let your body fix it. Give your aerobic system a chance, because it will work. So if you're in that situation, that's where you start. If you've built a good aerobic base and your MAF test has improved over the last few months, now the question is, what do I do? Do I keep getting faster at that slow heart rate, or is it time to do some speed work, which could be fine? Is it time to race? Nobody's racing now, I guess. You could do it on your own, but there is a time for high intensity training, and that would be an example of when to do it.
Yeah, I think with practical application, a really good thing that you spoke to before was, if there isn't an improvement in 4 weeks, either you're doing something wrong in your lifestyle. Now, you said that there's nothing wrong with the program. To clarify, there's nothing wrong with the MAF program, but if you're following a program that is more traditional, where you're in zone 3, zone 4 for a high percentage of time, there is something wrong with your program. So that's definitely a practical application of shifting the percentage of time you spend in your heart rate zones to bring it into zone 2 aerobic.
Yeah, it's a very important point, because when you're building that aerobic base, you really can't exceed that MAF heart rate. You can't do your 200-meter sprint at the end. You can't run with your buddies on Sunday and keep up with the ones that are faster than you, because you're not going to build that aerobic system. You can't lift a fatiguing weightlifting program because that's a stress and it'll impair aerobic function. You could do non-fatiguing weightlifting, which is a whole nother issue, but and that won't interfere. But you have to take it serious, and it's serious because you haven't succeeded. And if you're saying to yourself, I got to do something, and if you're saying that, all I say is do it right.
Yeah, and I think people struggle with the issue of, if they're in a group training environment and they understand about math and they want to approach it and do it properly, they really need to ask themselves some deep questions about committing to doing this for 6 months. Like, I only coach one-on-one, and I don't use any other method apart from this, so that's fine. You know, my people do what I want them to do because I don't do group stuff. But in a group environment, people may have to say to themselves, okay, I'm going to accept that I might not do the group sessions and stick with everyone, or do my own thing with my coach but use this different method for 3 or 6 months, but test it every month and see the results. Because if they might go out and do 3 runs or 3 sessions a week at math, and then go and do a group session on Sunday and smash themselves, my thought, and I'm sure you'll confirm it, is that that's just a whole waste of that week. Because if you busted your heart rate up and your cortisol raises, you're going to have to take 4 or 5 days to get back into fat burning, especially if you haven't dialed in the nutrition and you're still eating bad.
Yeah, and most people don't do that. But you're right. I've worked with a lot of teams, and it was hard in the beginning, not for me, but for all the team members. But here's a phenomenal thing. We're all different. We are all different, and so when you're all running at the same pace, your heart rates are all different. When you're all playing basketball, 2 teams, everybody's heart rate's different. And so I've worked with plenty of teams, and I've had no trouble, once this whole thing is explained, that everybody has their own heart rate. And this is training. When we're training, we're going to be very specific. We're going to train with high quality. We're not just going to go out and, throw the ball around, or go out and ride with a bunch of other riders because it's Sunday and it's a social scene. You can still meet with your group and work out. You can all meet at the same time, and you could, say hi and chat and whatever, and then you can all take off at the same time, and you can all go on your own pace. And if you all run for an hour or 2 hours, you all come back at the same time.
Yeah.
And then you can chat some more and socialize. So it can be done.
Yeah, you don't have to go into isolation to do the MAF method. You can absolutely stay social and integrate it. I've seen plenty of athletes do it. I've done it. It does take a little bit of an ego check, to let people run off or ride off and say,
especially if there's if not everybody's on the program, and they want to compete with anybody who's willing to compete with them on a training run. That's how people get hurt. But the thing about training, the thing about MAF is that it requires discipline. And listen to Mark Allen talk about what he went through from a discipline standpoint, from a mental standpoint, the things he had to learn about all of this. And it was a huge breakthrough for him when it all kind of came together. But discipline is the key. And discipline doesn't mean you play hurt. It means you play smart.
I think, Phil, that is a fantastic way to finish up this morning's webinar, using Mark Allen and his great performance that he's done by working with you for those years. I think, that's an example we can all look at to learn more about that discipline, the grit, and his results he achieved along with many other people. So, we'd like to thank you so much for your time today. I would highly recommend people visit your website. There's lots of great information, the 2-week test, the math test, there's documents, there's a range of podcasts, there's videos. There is so much information that can be valuable to us as coaches and to our athletes. And, even though some people may have thought some of this was a bit weird or a bit different, I do urge you to listen to Phil and what he has to say, because I know it's produced great results for many people, myself, I'm sure Katie as well. And you just got to, think to his point, if something's not working, you've got to do something different. Now, in the chat screen, I think Bronwyn will put some information about Phil's course, the foundation course. There will be a discount code available that you can access through Triathlon Victoria in the normal way. And we want to thank everyone for attending. And Phil, thank you very much again for your time. Katie, thanks for turning up. Some great comments and insights there from you as well. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future when you have time, Phil.
Anytime. I'm always up for having some fun. This is always fun, and that's why I do it.
Great. Thank you.
Hanging up the phone, I lay down to cry. I thought about this roller coaster ride. Best thing we can do is just say goodbye. I feel the feeling falling deep inside. She did it to me twice in one lifetime. Too much for one heart. Twice in one lifetime. Do I look the part? Do I look the part? Listening to that voice woke me up, sighing. I thought about a dream I did not have. I lied. Best thing for me is to go to bed and die, and feel the feeling falling deep inside. She did it to me twice in one lifetime. Too much for one heart. Twice in one lifetime. Do I look the part? Do I look the part? Hanging up the phone, I lay down to cry. I thought about this roller coaster ride. Best thing we can do is just say goodbye, and feel the feeling inside.